What secrets lie hidden within the mysterious pomegranate seeds? And how far would you go to reclaim what was lost to fate? Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight's tale is The Pomegranate Seeds by Nathaniel Hawthorne, a classic tale reimagined and retold for the modern age.
Mother Ceres loved her daughter Proserpina more than anything in the world. She rarely let her wander the fields alone. But this day was different. The earth's crops, wheat, corn, barley, rye, every kind of grain, demanded her attention, and the season had lagged behind. The harvest needed to hurry. Ceres wrapped a poppy-threaded turban around her head, a signature flourish of hers, then climbed into her magnificent chariot, drawn not by horses, but by a pair of winged dragons whose scales glimmered like molten gold. She was ready to soar across the skies. "Mother," Proserpina's voice trembled with a mix of longing and excitement, "I'll be so lonely while you're gone. Could I run down to the shore and invite the sea nymphs to play?" Ceres smiled, a hint of both pride and caution in her eyes. "Yes, my little one. The nymphs are gentle and kind, but stay close to them. Do not wander the fields alone. The world has its dangers, even for girls who think themselves grown." Proserpina nodded solemnly, promising to behave like a wise young lady. No sooner had the dragon's wings carried Ceres out of sight than she was already running toward the shore, her hair catching the sun's light. She called, and the sea answered. Faces shimmered from the water, hair the color of the deepest sea green, eyes glinting like pearls beneath the waves. The nymphs rose gracefully, their laughter mingling with the crashing surf. In their hands were glistening shells, treasures from the ocean's depths. On the damp sand, where the waves licked their toes, they began crafting a necklace for Proserpina, each shell threaded with care. Her eyes sparkled with delight. In return, she begged them to follow her just a little way into the fields to gather the flowers that would become wreaths for each of her friends, a small token of her gratitude and innocence. The air was filled with the mingling scents of salt water and blooming petals. A world of magic stretched between the sea and the land, and for a brief, fleeting moment, everything felt possible. "Oh no, dear Proserpina," the sea nymphs protested, their voices like the soft ripple of waves. "We cannot follow you onto dry land. The air there, so harsh, so unforgiving, dries us out. We need the ocean's salt breeze with every breath, and the surf to bathe us constantly. Without it, we'd shrivel up like forgotten seaweed, left to parch under the sun." Proserpina's eyes shone with determination, though a hint of disappointment lingered. "It is a shame," she murmured, "but wait here, and I will run through the fields, filling my apron with flowers. I promise to return before the waves have kissed you 10 times. I want to make wreaths for you, as beautiful as this necklace of shimmering shells." The nymphs consented, their heads bobbing like gentle buoys in the surf. "Very well. While you are gone, we will rest on a soft sponge bed beneath the waves. The air is too dry today for comfort, but we shall peek above the water every few minutes to watch for your return." With a joyful skip, Proserpina dashed toward the spot where just yesterday flowers had been in full bloom. But time had dimmed their beauty. Determined to find only the freshest, most radiant blossoms for her friends, she wandered further into the fields. And what wonders she found! Violets as wide and fragrant as a spring morning, roses blushing with delicate perfection, hyacinths whose scent could lift the heaviest heart, and pinks so aromatic that the air itself seemed to hum with their perfume. Some flowers shimmered in colors and shapes so strange, it's as if they had never existed before. On more than one occasion, Proserpina swore she saw a cluster of blooms rise from the earth right before her eyes, as though the land itself was tempting her forward. Her apron soon bulged, overflowing with the treasures of the field. She paused, heart fluttering with excitement, ready to return to the shore and join the nymphs on the wet sand, where together they would twist the blossoms into wreaths, laughing as the waves whispered around them. But just a little farther, Proserpina froze. What she saw made her gasp. Before her stood a shrub unlike any she had ever encountered, completely blanketed in flowers of staggering beauty. "Oh, the darlings!" she exclaimed, her voice trembling with wonder. For a moment she thought to herself, "I passed by this spot only a moment ago. How could I have missed such splendor?" The closer she drew, the more mesmerizing the shrub became. Its blossoms, over 100 of them, flamed in colors so vivid they seemed almost unreal. Each flower was unique, yet together they shared a subtle kinship, like sisters united in silent harmony. But the leaves glimmered with a glossy, almost unnatural sheen, and the petals carried a perfection so dazzling that Proserpina hesitated. Could such beauty conceal danger? A flicker of doubt seized her, and she almost turned to flee. "What a foolish child I am," she chided herself, summoning courage. "It is the most magnificent shrub the earth has ever borne. I must take it home, plant it in Mother's garden so she may see it too." Balancing her apron overflowing with flowers in one hand, she grabbed the stem of the great shrub with the other. She pulled and pulled again, but the earth clung stubbornly to its roots. The plant seemed rooted not just in soil, but in the very heart of the land. As she tugged harder, the ground around the stem cracked and shifted, sending tiny tremors beneath her feet. Was it possible the roots reached down into some hidden, enchanted cavern? Shaking her head at such fanciful thoughts, she laughed and tried once more. With a final heave, the shrub yanked free, and Proserpina staggered backward, holding it triumphantly. Her eyes widened as she stared at the gaping hole it left behind, a dark, hollow reminder that even beauty could conceal secrets beneath the surface. To Proserpina's astonishment, the hole beneath the magnificent shrub continued to widen and deepen, as if the earth itself were pulling apart. The rumbling from its depths grew louder, echoing like thundering hooves and clattering wheels. Frozen with fear, she leaned closer, straining her eyes into the shadowy abyss, and then she saw it. A team of 4 jet-black horses, smoke curling from their flaring nostrils, bursting from the depths with a gilded chariot spinning wildly behind them. The horses leapt into the air, hooves high, manes tossing, tails flicking, each movement bursting with raw power and untamed energy, right beside where Proserpina stood. In the chariot sat a man of striking nobility. His clothes shimmered with opulent fabrics, and a crown of blazing diamonds rested upon his head. His face was handsome, but carried a stern, sullen air. He shaded his eyes with one hand, as though sunlight was a stranger he had rarely met. The moment he noticed Proserpina, he beckoned her forward. "Do not be afraid," he said, his smile as cheerful as he could muster. "Come, would you like to ride with me in my beautiful chariot?" But the girl could barely breathe. Every instinct screamed danger, and all she wanted was escape. The stranger's smile did little to calm her, and his deep, commanding voice rumbled like an earthquake underground, chilling her to the bone. As is often the case with children facing peril, Proserpina's first thought was of safety, her mother. "Mother, Mother Ceres, come quickly, save me!" Her cry was far too faint to reach her mother. In truth, Ceres was likely thousands of miles away, urging crops to grow in some distant land, and even if she had been near, it would not have mattered. The moment Proserpina screamed, the stranger moved. In a single terrifying motion, he leapt from the chariot, seized the child in his arms, and swept her back aboard. The reins snapped sharply in his grip as he shouted to the 4 black horses. They surged forward at once, not galloping so much as flying, the ground blurring beneath them. In an instant, the gentle valley of Enna vanished from sight, the only home Proserpina had ever known. Another heartbeat passed, and even Mount Etna faded into a hazy blue smudge, indistinguishable from the smoke spilling from its fiery crown. Still she screamed. Still she cried out for her mother. As the chariot thundered onward, Proserpina flung her apron wide, scattering her flowers along the path, petals tumbling through the air like lost prayers. Her cries echoed across the land, and many mothers paused, hearts tightening, rushing to check on their children. But Mother Ceres was too far away. She heard nothing. The stranger leaned closer, lowering his voice, attempting something like kindness. "Why be so afraid, little one?" he said, forcing gentleness into his deep, rugged tone. "I mean you no harm. See, were you gathering flowers? When we reach my palace, I will give you gardens far finer than these, flowers made of pearls, of diamonds, of glowing rubies." He paused, watching her trembling face. "Do you know who I am?" he continued. "They call me Pluto, king of diamonds and every treasure buried beneath the earth. All gold and silver belong to me. The copper, the iron, the coal that fuels the world, all are mine." He lifted the glittering crown upon his head. "You may have this as a toy if you wish. We shall be good friends, and once we leave this tiresome sunlight behind, you may even find me agreeable." But Proserpina could only sob, her voice breaking with desperation. "Let me go home," she cried. "Please, let me go home." "My home is far better than your mother's," King Pluto declared, his voice echoing over the rushing wind. "A palace of pure gold, with windows of crystal. The sun rarely touches these halls, so I light the rooms with lamps of diamonds. You have never seen anything so grand as my throne. If you wish, you may sit upon it as my little queen, while I, your humble servant, take the footstool." "I don't care for golden palaces or thrones," Proserpina sobbed, her tears blurring the world around her. "Oh, my mother! Take me back to my mother!" But Pluto only cracked his whip and urged the black horses onward, faster than ever. "Do not be foolish, Proserpina," he said, a dark, sullen note in his voice. "I offer you my palace, my crown, all the riches buried beneath the earth, and you treat me as though I were doing you harm? The only thing my palace truly needs is a cheerful little maid to run up and down the halls, filling the rooms with her smile. That is your task and your delight for King Pluto." "Never!" she cried, her small frame trembling. "I will never smile again until you set me at my mother's door." But her words were swallowed by the rushing wind. Pluto urged the horses faster, the golden chariot soaring over the landscape like a storm made flesh. Proserpina screamed, calling for her mother, pouring every ounce of her fear and despair into the sound. Her voice rang long and loud until it dwindled to a whisper. And then, in that fleeting moment, she caught sight of a broad, waving field of grain, and there, at work among the stalks, was Mother Ceres, tending the crops, too far away to notice the golden chariot tearing across the land. Gathering the last fragments of her strength, Proserpina let out one final desperate scream, but even as it echoed into the distance, she had already vanished from her mother's sight, a small figure whisked away by the relentless chariot, carried toward a fate unknown. King Pluto steered the chariot onto a road that grew darker and more foreboding with every passing moment. Towering rocks and sheer precipices flanked the path, amplifying the thunderous roar of the chariot wheels until it seemed as if the earth itself were rumbling. Trees and shrubs clung stubbornly to the rocky crevices, their leaves twisted and shadowed, as if mourning some forgotten doom. Though it was scarcely noon, a gray twilight began to settle over the road, shrouding everything in a dim, eerie haze. The black horses galloped with terrifying speed, carrying them beyond the reach of the sun. And yet, the deeper the shadows grew, the more Pluto's expression softened into satisfaction. When he abandoned the false, forced smile, his face held a noble, if somber, beauty. Through the gathering dusk, Proserpina glimpsed him and dared to hope that perhaps he was not as wicked as he had seemed. "Ah," Pluto murmured, his voice echoing against the cliffs. "This twilight is refreshing. That tiresome glare of the sun is gone. How much more agreeable is the glow of lamplight or torchlight, especially when it dances upon diamonds. You shall see it soon. It will be a sight to remember when we reach my palace." "Is it far?" Proserpina asked hesitantly. "And will you bring me back afterward?" Pluto's eyes glimmered in the dim light. "We will speak of that in due time. We are now entering my dominions. Do you see that towering gateway ahead? Beyond those pillars lies my home. And there is my faithful mastiff. Cerberus, Cerberus, come forth, my good dog." With a flick of the reins, the chariot halted between the massive stone pillars. From the threshold rose a creature so strange it made Proserpina gasp. A mastiff with 3 heads, each fiercer than the last. Its fur bristled, eyes gleamed with menace, and teeth bared like jagged ivory. But Pluto reached forward and patted all 3 heads with ease, as if it were the gentlest of companions. Pluto's affection for his 3-headed dog was astonishing. He petted Cerberus as tenderly as one might stroke a tiny spaniel, all silky ears and pearly fur. The monstrous dog, for its part, seemed delighted to see its master, wagging its tails with such vigor that Proserpina's eyes were drawn to the movement. But, to her horror, the wagging tail was no ordinary appendage. It was a live dragon, eyes blazing like molten fire, fangs glinting with venomous promise. While Cerberus fawned on Pluto, the dragon tail thrashed angrily, looking every bit as ill-tempered and rebellious as a creature of its own will could be. "Will the dog bite me?" Proserpina whispered, shrinking closer to Pluto. "What a frightful creature!" "Fear not," Pluto replied, calm and commanding. "Down, Cerberus. And now, my little Proserpina, we shall move on." The chariot rolled forward, the black horses thundering across the shadowed road. Pluto's eyes gleamed with pride as he gestured toward the veins of gold embedded in the rocks and pointed to places where a single strike of a pickaxe could yield bushels of diamonds. All around, gems sparkled in the dim light, treasures of unimaginable value above ground, yet here they were common, almost mundane. Soon they approached a bridge wrought of dark iron. Pluto halted and gestured for Proserpina to look below. There flowed a stream, black, slow, and lifeless, moving with a languid reluctance as though it had forgotten which way it was meant to go. The water mirrored nothing, not the bridge, not the rocks, not the trees, a stagnant river that seemed to exist for itself alone, mysterious and forbidding. "This is the river Lethe," King Pluto said, his voice echoing softly through the shadowed valley. "Do you not find it a pleasant stream?" "I think it looks very dismal," Proserpina answered, her small face pale with unease. Pluto's expression darkened, a flicker of sullen pride in his eyes. "I think it suits my taste," he muttered. "But the water has one remarkable quality. A single sip makes a person forget all sorrow, all care, all the torment of their past. Just a little taste, my dear Proserpina, and you would remember nothing of your mother, nothing to keep you from being perfectly happy in my palace. I shall have some ready in a golden goblet the moment we arrive." "No, no, no," she cried, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. "I would 1,000 times rather be miserable remembering my mother than be happy forgetting her. That dear, dear mother, I shall never, never forget her." Pluto only smiled, a thin, knowing curve of his lips. "We shall see," he said. "You do not yet know the delights that await in my palace. And now, look, here we are at the entrance. These pillars are solid gold, I assure you." He lifted Proserpina gently into his arms and carried her up a grand flight of steps into the palace's immense hall. The room was bathed in light from countless precious stones, each gem burning like a tiny living sun. Ruby, sapphire, diamond, emerald, all blazed with 100-fold radiance, illuminating the vast expanse. Yet, despite the brilliance, there was an unsettling gloom in the hall. Nothing in the enormous chamber was truly beautiful or comforting, except for one small, fragile figure, Proserpina herself, clutching a single earthly flower she had not allowed to slip from her hand. And in that moment, it seemed clear that even King Pluto had never known happiness in all this opulence. Perhaps this was why he had taken Proserpina, to have something real to love, something that could pierce the cold magnificence of his golden palace and warm the emptiness in his heart. And though King Pluto pretended to disdain the sunlight of the upper world, the presence of the little girl, dimmed as she was by her tears, seemed to bring a fragile, watery sunbeam into the enchanted hall. For a moment, the cold brilliance of diamonds and gold softened, touched by the warmth of her living light. Pluto clapped his hands, summoning his servants. "Prepare a most sumptuous banquet at once," he commanded, "and do not forget, a golden beaker of the water of Lethe must be set before Proserpina." "I will drink neither that nor anything else," Proserpina declared, her voice trembling but firm, "and I will not taste a morsel even if you keep me here forever." Pluto, as if struggling with his own unfamiliar kindness, patted her cheek gently. "You are a spoiled child, my little Proserpina," he said, "but when you see what my cook has prepared, I dare say your appetite will return." The head cook was summoned, and Pluto gave strict instructions. Set before the child all the delicacies that young people typically crave. Yet he left a secret to chance, for in the land of magic, anyone who tastes the food of the enchanted realm can never return to their own world. Had Pluto offered her the simple fare she was used to, bread and milk or plain fruit, Proserpina might have been tempted. But the cook, like all cooks in tales of magic, had no taste for simplicity. Only rich pastries, spiced meats, and sweet confections found favor in his eyes. To Proserpina, these foods were strange and unappetizing. Their heavy aromas made her stomach turn rather than whet her hunger. Thus, the first test of her courage and steadfastness began, unseen in the brilliance of the golden palace, yet weaving the invisible threads of fate around her heart. And now our story must leave the shadowed halls of King Pluto and follow Mother Ceres, who had been left alone and bereft of her beloved daughter. You may recall seeing her, half hidden among the swaying stalks of grain, while the 4 black horses thundered along with the chariot that carried Proserpina far from her home. And you remember the piercing scream that tore through the air just as the chariot vanished from sight. Of all the cries Proserpina had uttered that day, this one alone reached for Mother's ears. At first, Ceres had mistaken the rumbling of the chariot wheels for a clap of thunder, imagining a shower was approaching that would help her crops grow. But when the scream rang out, so full of terror and longing, she froze, scanning the horizon, uncertain where it had come from. Almost certainly, she thought, it must have been her own child's voice. And yet, the idea seemed impossible. How could her dear Proserpina have traveled over lands and seas so far, a journey she herself could not have made without her winged dragons? For a fleeting moment, Ceres tried to persuade herself it must be some other child, not her own, crying out in distress. Even so, the mother's heart stirred with a tide of tender fears, the kind that rise in every parent who must leave their child unattended. Without a faithful guardian or watchful caretaker, Ceres' mind raced with worries for her daughter's safety. Hastily, she abandoned the field she had been tending so diligently. Her work left unfinished, the grain the next day appeared blighted and weak, as if pleading for both sun and rain, its roots troubled and its ears of corn failing to thrive. All because her heart had been torn away from her daughter, leaving both mother and crops yearning for what they had lost. The pair of dragons must have had extraordinarily nimble wings, for in less than an hour, Mother Ceres found herself standing at the door of her empty home. A sinking feeling gripped her heart, but she knew her daughter loved the sea, and so she hurried to the shore with all the speed she could muster. There, peeking over a cresting wave, she saw the wet, anxious faces of the sea nymphs, their emerald hair glistening with droplets of water. For hours the little creatures had waited faithfully on a spongy bank beneath the surf, popping their foreheads above the waves every half-minute or so to check whether Proserpina had returned. Now, seeing her, they allowed the tide to toss them gently ashore at her feet. "Where is Proserpina?" Ceres cried, her voice trembling. "Where is my child? Tell me, naughty sea nymphs, have you lured her beneath the waves?" "Oh no, good Mother Ceres," the nymphs replied, tossing back their shining green ringlets and meeting her gaze. "We would never dream of such a thing. Proserpina played with us, it is true, but she left long ago, only to run a little way onto the dry land and gather flowers for a wreath. That was early in the day. Since then we have seen nothing of her." Ceres scarcely paused to hear more. With fear and urgency flooding every step, she set off to question the neighbors, asking, pleading, searching, yet no one could tell her what had become of her beloved Proserpina. A fisherman noticed the tiny footprints in the sand while carrying his basket of fish home. A rustic had glimpsed the child stooping to pick flowers. Some villagers had heard either the distant rumble of a chariot or the peal of far-off thunder. One elderly woman, while gathering herbs, thought she heard a scream, but assumed it was merely childish nonsense and paid it no mind. And so, though the clues were scattered and fleeting, the truth remained hidden, and Mother Ceres' heart grew heavier with every passing moment, haunted by the image of her child lost somewhere beyond her reach. The foolish villagers! It took them an eternity to tell the little they knew, and by the time Mother Ceres realized she would have to seek her daughter elsewhere, darkness had swallowed the land. With a heavy heart, she lit a torch and set forth, vowing not to return until Proserpina was found. In her panic and grief, she forgot all about her chariot and the winged dragons. Perhaps she thought she could search more thoroughly on foot, scanning every shadow, every corner, every path. Torch held high, she began her sorrowful journey. It was not long before she stumbled upon one of the magnificent flowers from the enchanted shrub that Proserpina had pulled from the ground. "Ha!" muttered Ceres, examining it in the flickering torchlight. "This flower is no ordinary blossom. The earth did not produce it by my hand, nor by chance. It is enchanted, and perhaps poisonous. Perhaps it has harmed my poor child." Clutching the flower close to her bosom, she pressed on, uncertain whether she would ever find another trace of her daughter. Through the long night, she knocked on every cottage door, roused weary farmers and laborers, and begged them to tell her if they had seen Proserpina. Half asleep and bewildered, they gawked at her, pitying the anxious woman, and urged her to come in and rest. At the gates of grand palaces, her loud summons startled the servants, who hurried to open the portals, imagining some great king or queen demanding a feast and stately chambers. But when they saw only a grieving woman, torch in hand, a wreath of withered poppies upon her head, they scowled and sometimes threatened to set the guard dogs upon her. No one had seen Proserpina. No one could give Mother Ceres so much as a hint of the direction in which to continue her search. And so, with torches flickering in the night and hope dwindling like the dying embers, Ceres wandered on, her heart heavy and her mind filled with fear for her lost daughter. Thus the night passed, yet Mother Ceres pressed on without rest, without pausing to eat, and forgetting even to extinguish her torch. Through the rosy blush of dawn and the bright golden light of morning, the red flame flickered thin and pale, but still it burned, unwavering. What magical substance had forged this torch? For by night it shone as brightly as ever, and through all the weary days and nights of her search, it never succumbed to rain or wind, guiding her path in unyielding light. Her quest did not concern only mortal beings. In the secluded woods, along trickling streams, she encountered creatures of another realm, the spirits and guardians of old places, friendly to those who knew their language and customs, just as Ceres did. Sometimes she would tap the knotted trunk of a majestic oak. The bark would split as if alive, and forth would step a beautiful hamadryad, the tree's spirit, who shared its long life and danced with the whispering leaves. Yet not one of these sylvan maidens had glimpsed Proserpina. Further on, Ceres might find a fountain bubbling from a pebbled hollow, and dip her hand into its sparkling water. From the stream rose a graceful water nymph, hair dripping, body undulating with the fountain's restless motion. She gazed at Ceres with eyes full of tears, sharing the mother's sorrow. But when asked whether Proserpina and paused to drink from the fountain, the naiad only murmured in the soft, rippling voice of the water, "No." And so, through enchanted forests, across lonely streams, among spirits of wood and water, Ceres' search endured. Her heart ached, yet she could not rest, for every moment away from her child felt like a lifetime, and every shadow, every rustle of leaf or ripple of water was a reminder of the precious daughter she had lost. Along her endless journey, Ceres encountered many strange and wondrous creatures. Sometimes fauns would bound out from the forests, looking like sunburnt peasants, except for their little horns, hairy ears, and goat-like hind legs. Normally playful and merry, even they grew solemn when asked about Proserpina, for they had no news to offer. At other times, a raucous gang of satyrs would appear, faces like monkeys, tails of horses swishing behind them, dancing wildly and laughing uproariously. When Ceres questioned them, they only laughed louder, turning her sorrow into their sport. How cruel these mischievous beings could be. Once, while crossing a lonely sheep pasture, she came upon Pan, seated at the foot of a tall rock, playing a shepherd's flute. Horns, hairy ears, and goat feet marked him as one of the wild folk, yet he bowed respectfully to Ceres, offering her a taste of milk and honey from a wooden bowl. Even so, Pan could tell her nothing of her missing daughter. And so 9 long days and nights passed. Ceres wandered tirelessly, finding nothing but the occasional withered flower, which she pressed to her bosom, hoping it might have fallen from her child's hand. All day she marched beneath the scorching sun. At night, the magical torch burned bright, guiding her steps as she refused to rest, determined to follow every clue wherever it might lead. On the 10th day, as the sun shone high overhead, she suddenly spied the mouth of a cavern. Though bright noon bathed the world around it, within its depths lay only a dusky twilight. And there, faint but unmistakable, a torch glimmered, its light dancing in the shadows, promising the first real clue to her daughter's fate. The torch flickered, struggling against the gloom, casting only a melancholy glimmer that barely illuminated the cavern's shadowy interior. But Mother Ceres was determined. She would leave no corner unexplored. Stepping closer, she held her torch before her, forcing the light deeper into the darkness. There, among the brown leaves of last autumn, swept into the cave by the restless wind, she glimpsed a figure, a strange woman unlike any she had ever seen. Her head was oddly shaped, almost like a dog's, and around it coiled a wreath of snakes. Yet Mother Ceres, sorrowful and desperate, sensed immediately that this was a creature who found delight only in misery, a woman who spoke to no one unless they were as wretched as she herself reveled in being. I am wretched enough now, Ceres thought, her heart aching for her lost child, to speak with this melancholy Hecate, even if her sadness dwarfs mine 100-fold. With that, she stepped fully into the cavern and sat upon the withered leaves beside the dog-headed woman. Since the loss of Proserpina, she had found no other companion, and any solace, however strange, was welcome. "Oh, Hecate," she said, her voice trembling, "if ever you lose a daughter, you will know what sorrow is. Tell me, for pity's sake, have you seen my child Proserpina pass by your cavern?" The figure drew a ragged breath, her cracked voice sighing with each word. "No," Hecate whispered, "I have seen nothing of your daughter, Mother Ceres. But my ears, they are attuned to cries of distress across the world. 9 days ago, as I sat here, immersing myself in misery, I heard a young girl shriek, her voice racked with terror. Something terrible has happened to her. A dragon or some other cruel monster has carried her away, you may be sure." "You wound me with your words," cried Ceres, her knees nearly giving way. "Where did the sound come from? Which way did it vanish?" Hecate's cracked voice floated through the gloom. It passed swiftly, along with a heavy rumble of wheels toward the east. I can tell you nothing more. In my honest judgment, you may never see your daughter again. The wisest course is to take up residence here in this cavern. Then we shall be the 2 most miserable women in the world." "Not yet, dark Hecate," Ceres replied, her eyes flashing with determination. "But come with me first. Bring your torch and help me search for my lost child. And if, in some cruel fate, I am forced to accept that she is gone forever, then I will show what true misery is lying upon these withered leaves or on bare rock. But until I know she has truly perished, I will not surrender even a moment to grief." Hecate frowned at the thought of leaving her shadowy cave for the bright world outside, but she reflected that Ceres' sorrow would cast a twilight around them, dimming the sun's glare, allowing her to enjoy her gloom all the same. With a resigned sigh, she agreed. And so the 2 women set out together, torches in hand, despite the clear daylight and bright sunshine. The torchlight created a strange, haunting gloom, so that passers-by could barely make out their forms. Those who glimpsed Hecate with the wreath of writhing snakes on her head generally thought it wiser to flee without a second glance. As they moved along, cloaked in their woe, a sudden thought struck Ceres, a spark of hope amid her despair, and she tightened her grip on the torch, ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. "There is one person," Ceres exclaimed, her eyes lighting with sudden resolve, who must have seen my poor child and can surely tell me what has become of her. Why did I not think of him before? It is Phoebus." Hecate shivered, wringing her hands. "What? The young man who always basks in the sunshine? Oh, do not think of approaching him. He is frivolous, always smiling, and his light, oh, his blinding light will scorch my poor eyes, which I have almost wept away already." "You promised to be my companion," Ceres replied firmly. "Come, we must hurry, or the sunshine will fade, and Phoebus will be gone with it." With that, the two set off, sighing grievously as they traveled. Hecate, of course, made her lamentations louder than Ceres ever could, for her only pleasure lay in dwelling on misery, and she spared no effort to magnify it. After a long and wearisome journey, they finally reached the sunniest spot in the entire world. There, bathed in radiant light, stood a young man of astonishing beauty. His long, curling locks seemed spun from pure sunbeams. His garments shimmered like soft summer clouds, and the expression on his face glowed with vivid life. Hecate shrieked softly behind her hand, muttering that he ought to wear a black veil. Phoebus, for it was indeed he, held a lyre in his hands, making its strings tremble with sweet, lilting music. His song, recently composed, filled the air with exquisite poetry, blending melody and words in perfect harmony. His very presence seemed to illuminate the world around him. As Ceres and her gloomy companion approached, Phoebus smiled warmly and cheerfully. Hecate's snake-wreathed head hissed in irritation, and she longed to retreat to her shadowy cave. But Ceres, grief-stricken and steadfast, did not notice nor did she care whether Phoebus smiled or frowned. Her heart beat only for one purpose, to find her lost daughter. "Phoebus!" Ceres cried, her voice trembling with desperation. "I am in terrible distress, and I have come to you for help. Can you tell me what has become of my dear daughter Proserpina?" Phoebus paused, his mind swirling with so many bright, fleeting thoughts that he had to concentrate hard. "Proserpina? Did you say her name?" he asked slightly, as if fishing through a river of memories. Then his face lit up. "Ah, yes, I remember her now. A most lovely child. And I bring you good news, my dear lady. I saw little Proserpina just a few days ago. She is safe, truly safe, and in excellent hands." Ceres sank to her knees, clinging to him, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, where is my precious child?" she cried, her voice breaking with anguish. Phoebus, still withing his fingers over his lyre, letting threads of soft music weave in and out of his words, spoke gently. "She was gathering flowers, as she loves to do. Her taste is truly exquisite, when suddenly she was snatched by King Pluto and carried away to his realm. I've never seen his dominions myself, but I am told his palace is magnificent, built with the rarest treasures, gold, diamonds, pearls, and all manner of precious stones, which will surround your daughter wherever she goes. You need not fear for her safety. Even without sunlight, her days will be rich with beauty and wonder." "Hush!" Ceres interrupted, her eyes flashing with righteous fury. "Say no such thing. What is all this splendor if her heart is alone? What are treasures without love? I will have her back, Phoebus. Will you come with me to demand my child from this wicked Pluto?" "Forgive me, dear Ceres," Phoebus bowed with a delicate elegance. "I truly wish you every success, but my own affairs demand my presence, and to be frank, I am not on good terms with King Pluto. His three-headed guardian would never allow me through the gates, especially if I carried even a single sheaf of sunlight, which you know is strictly forbidden in his realm." "Ah, Phoebus," Ceres replied, her voice tinged with bitter reproach. "You have a harp in place of a heart. Farewell." "Will you not stay, even for a moment?" Phoebus asked, hopeful. "I could turn your tragic tale of Proserpina into a few impromptu verses." But Ceres shook her head and hurried on, Hecate trailing gloomily at her side. Phoebus, ever the poet, immediately began to weave an ode to the grief of the poor mother. His verses were exquisite, tender, and sorrowful, But the poet's heart, trained to pluck its strings for music, felt no true pang. So while the song mourned, Phoebus remained as merry as the sunlight that kissed his golden hair. Meanwhile, Mother Ceres trudged on, now fully aware of her daughter's fate. But knowledge brought no comfort. Her despair deepened. While Proserpina had walked upon the earth, there had been hope. But now, trapped beyond the iron gates of Pluto's underworld, guarded by the fearsome three-headed Cerberus, escape seemed impossible. Hecate, ever the pessimist, whispered in her ear, "Why not return with me to the cavern? There we can mourn together, the two most wretched women in the world." But Ceres, burning with maternal determination, would hear none of it. She would not rest, not until her daughter was back in her arms. Ceres shook her head and told Hecate plainly that the gloomy cave could be her refuge if she wished, but as for herself, she would roam the earth in search of the hidden entrance to King Pluto's underworld. Hecate, delighted to leave the sunlit world, hurried back to her shadowy cavern, startling a few unsuspecting children along the way with a glimpse of her snake-wreathed head. And so poor Mother Ceres wandered on alone, the eternal torch held high before her, its flame a reflection of the twin fires within her heart, grief and hope, intertwined and unquenchable. The sorrow changed her in ways both cruel and swift. Once radiant and youthful, she now looked aged beyond her years. She no longer cared for her appearance, and the wreath of withered poppies she had placed on her head the morning of Proserpina's disappearance remained there, a silent emblem of her anguish. Her hair fell in wild disarray, and her clothes hung loose. Travelers who crossed her path whispered that she seemed a mad woman, unaware that she was the very goddess who once watched over every seed and harvest. For the moment, she abandoned the concerns of fields and farmers. The crops were left to flourish or fail as they might, and the rhythm of sowing and reaping no longer touched her heart. Her attention stirred only when she came upon children at play, gathering flowers along the roads. Then she would pause, tears shining in her eyes, and watch them with a mother's longing. And often the children, sensing her sorrow, would cluster around her knees, gazing up with wide, trusting eyes. Ceres would kneel, brush a stray curl from their foreheads, and place a gentle kiss on each. Then she would guide them home, whispering advice to their mothers. Never let these little ones wander too far, for even the brightest day can hide shadows that steal them away. For if they do, Ceres would warn, it may happen to you as it has to me, that the iron-hearted King Pluto will take a liking to your darlings and snatch them up in his chariot, carrying them away forever. One day, during her endless quest for the hidden entrance to Pluto's shadowy kingdom, Ceres arrived at the palace of King Ceres in Eleusis. Climbing the lofty steps, she entered through the grand portal and was immediately struck by the commotion within. The royal household was in deep alarm. The queen's infant was sickly, moaning with pain, refusing all nourishment. Queen Metniara, distraught and desperate, clasped the tiny wailing child in her arms. Seeing Ceres ascend the steps with a calm maternal presence, the queen's heart leapt. Could this be the very person who might save her child? "Will you trust the child entirely to me?" Ceres asked, her voice firm yet gentle. "Yes, gladly," cried the queen. "If you will devote all your care and attention to him, I am sure he will be safe." Ceres' eyes softened with memory, and she replied, "You are right. I once had a child of my own. I will nurse this little Prince Demophion as if he were my own, but heed my warning. Interfere not with any treatment I deem proper, lest the child suffer through folly." Then, bending over the infant, she pressed her lips to his forehead. Instantly, a calm passed over him. The tears ceased, and he nestled close against her, a small smile breaking through his pain. From that day forward, Mother Ceres took up her residence in the palace. her torch burning faithfully in a corner, casting a steady glow in the quiet rooms. She devoted herself entirely to Demophion, tending to him with the skill of a mother who had known loss, allowing neither king nor queen to dictate his bath, his meals, his airing, or his bedtime. The child thrived under her care, as if the very presence of Ceres brought life and comfort into his small, fragile body. You would hardly believe it, yet in an astonishingly short time, the sickly little Prince Demophion was transformed. Gone were the pallor, the frailty, and the feebleness that had marked him. In their place were rosy cheeks, a robust frame, and a vitality that seemed almost supernatural. His tiny body grew strong, his laughter rang clear and bright, and his kicks and rolls filled the palace room with joyous energy. Even the 2 rows of gleaming ivory teeth appeared quicker than any ordinary child could muster. The women of the surrounding villages flocked to the palace, marveling at the sight of the once frail infant, now a plump and radiant little prince. They whispered among themselves in amazement, how could such a child thrive without ever taking a morsel of food, not even a single cup of milk? "Pray, nurse," Queen Metanira would ask time and again, "what secret is this that makes the child flourish so?" "I was a mother once," Ceres always replied, her voice calm but edged with the weight of memory. "Having nursed my own child, I know what other children need." Naturally, the queen's curiosity grew to an irresistible height. One night, she stealthily hid within the chamber where Ceres and the prince slept. The hearth glowed with embers, flickering warm and red upon the walls, casting dancing shadows of mother and child. Ceres sat with the prince in her lap, her hands gentle as she attended to every curve and limb. Then came the moment that would forever remain a secret of magical care. Ceres raked back the glowing embers, creating a small hollow among the red-hot coals where the backlog had burned. With the infant still crowing and clapping, entirely unafraid, she laid him carefully in the fiery hollow. Ashes were gently drawn over him, and quietly, without haste, Ceres turned away. The queen, hidden in the shadows, could scarcely believe her eyes. Such a method seemed perilous beyond measure, yet the child was unharmed, thriving even more with each passing night. A shiver of wonder ran through her, mingled with fear and awe at the mysterious power of this motherly figure, whose hands seemed to hold life itself. And so poor Mother Ceres, bereft once more of occupation, resumed her wandering with a heart heavy as lead. The torch she carried, ever burning like her hope and despair intertwined, cast its steady, mournful gleam along the roads and meadows, over hills and through forests, as if it alone were determined to keep vigil for the lost Proserpina. No creature, mortal or divine, could escape the notice of her keen eyes, yet none brought news of her daughter. Even the most timid birds would hush their song as she passed, as if they too mourned the child's absence. The streams seemed to flow more languidly beneath her tread, and the flowers, once so bright, drooped in sympathy with her sorrow. Each day she wandered farther. Each night the torch flared unwaveringly, guiding her steps across unknown lands. Though she had learned to tend another child with a miraculous touch, her heart yearned only for her own. The memory of Proserpina's laughter haunted every hour. The image of her small hands plucking flowers lingered in Ceres' mind, vivid as sunlight. And yet, in the midst of her grief, she did not despair utterly. For a mother's love, though pressed down by sorrow, never yields to hopelessness. Thus she continued, passing from village to village, from woodland to plain, leaving traces of her compassion wherever she went. Children gathered about her, drawn by her gentle voice and her tears, and Ceres, in spite of her anguish, smiled faintly upon them. She taught them to heed the ways of the world, to treasure their own mothers, and most of all, to beware lest the iron-hearted King Pluto should take a fancy to them, as he had to her Proserpina. Yet no matter the comfort she could give to others, her own heart remained a wilderness of fear and longing, a darkened land through which only her torch could light a path. Every twilight, every shadow, every whisper of wind carried with it the hope, tiny yet insistent, that somewhere, just beyond the reach of mortal eyes, the daughter she loved so dearly still waited to be found. If you like, I can continue with the next part of the search, when Ceres begins to find the first traces of Pluto's hidden kingdom, and the story moves toward the fateful reunion with Proserpina. Quicksilver, fleetest of all the messengers, arrived at Pluto's palace with wings that seemed to hum like silver bells in the air. He paused at the massive gilded gates, where Cerberus, the three-headed sentinel, eyed him suspiciously. Each head barked in succession, a discordant thunder that rattled off the golden pillars. But Quicksilver, nimble and fearless, twirled about in a flash of light, slipping between the growls and snapping jaws, until he stood boldly before the king himself. King Pluto, seated on his throne of unmelting gold, glanced down at the shining messenger. "What brings you here at such speed, little spark?" he asked, twisting his dark features into a mask of curiosity. "I come with urgent news from Mother Ceres," replied Quicksilver, his voice ringing like the rush of wind over mountain peaks. "The earth is dying, Pluto. All the fields are withering, the gardens are barren, and the flocks and herds suffer for lack of sustenance. She commands that her daughter be returned at once, or no green blade shall lift itself from the soil, nor flower, nor fruit, nor seed." Pluto leaned back in his throne, stroking his chin thoughtfully, and glanced at the sparkling gems that studded his walls. "Huh," he said at last, his voice echoing through the cavernous hall. "She grows insolent, this mother. And yet, what is Proserpina to me? A little child crying for her mother? Yes, I took her, and I will keep her, for she alone can bring life to my lonely heart. But perhaps there is some wisdom in this message of famine and grief." He waved his hand, summoning Quicksilver closer. "Tell Ceres that I will hear her pleas. Yet understand this, my dominion is mine, and not lightly do I yield what I possess. If she desires her daughter returned, she must come herself and entreat me in a manner worthy of a goddess. Until then, the earth shall suffer, and she shall feel the weight of her loss." Quicksilver bowed, sparkling with urgency, and turned to speed back to Ceres. Already the world outside quivered with anticipation, as if even the wind and the clouds sensed the impending confrontation. The die was cast. The return of Proserpina would demand courage, wit, and the full force of a mother's love. If you wish, I can continue immediately with Ceres' journey to Pluto's dark kingdom and the fateful negotiation for her daughter, where the tension between grief and power reaches its peak. Proserpina wandered through the vast halls, her little feet making soft echoes on the marble floors, while her eyes roamed over wonders beyond anything she had ever imagined. There were fountains whose waters glimmered like molten silver, gardens of crystalline flowers that would never wilt, and cabinets filled with shining treasures that sparkled like captured sunlight. And yet, in the midst of her grief, she did not despair utterly. The gloom of Pluto's dominions crept everywhere, like a silent shadow, reminding her of the sun and her mother's love, things she longed for but could not have. Sometimes she paused at the windows of crystal, through which not a ray of the upper world sun could penetrate. The world she knew seemed a distant dream, and the silence of the palace weighed upon her. Even the diamond lamps, brilliant as they were, could not rival the warmth and golden glow of the sun. Yet Proserpina's spirit remained unbroken. She would not let the palace's artificial delights deceive her, nor allow the pleasures of the eye to outweigh the longing of her heart. All this while, Pluto kept a watchful eye on her, perplexed by the child's steadfast refusal to enjoy anything he had to offer. "What a singular little maid," he would murmur to himself, stroking the heads of Cerberus, who lay curled at the foot of his throne. "None but I could have guessed that she would resist all these treasures. She has more spirit than I reckoned, and perhaps even more than I deserve." And yet, despite the months that had passed, Proserpina's courage and resolution never wavered. In wandering through the palace, she discovered hidden corners where no light penetrated, and rooms so vast that the echoes of her own voice seemed like a chorus of ghosts. She would explore these places quietly, sometimes whispering to herself about the world above, and sometimes pausing to lay her hand on the cold, gleaming walls, imagining her mother on the other side of the earth, searching desperately for her. So, though she lived amid gold and jewels, her heart clung to one simple truth. She would eat nothing, enjoy nothing, and submit to nothing until she was restored to her beloved mother. The palace could hold its diamonds and its glories. Proserpina's loyalty to her mother and the upper world remained untouched, like a small, steadfast flame in the midst of shadow and splendor. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and the words echoed sadly through the long, jeweled hall. Pluto looked after the scattered gems without anger, but with a deeper shadow on his brow than before. "You wrong them, little one," said he gravely. "These stones were fashioned in darkness and sorrow, and yet they shine forever. Flowers fade in a day." "Yes," replied Proserpina softly, "but while they live, they make the world glad. Even their fading is beautiful, because it tells us that sunshine and springtime will come again." Pluto made no answer. He seated himself upon his throne of black marble, and for a long time sat silent, watching the child as she stood gazing toward the dim arches of the palace, as if her eyes could pierce through the solid earth and behold the sky above it. Never before had the king of that shadowy realm felt so lonely in the midst of all his power and splendor. Just then, a light, quick sound, half a footstep, half a flutter, ran along the corridor, and in an instant Quicksilver stood before them, with his winged cap still quivering from the speed of his journey. "Good King Pluto," cried he with a laugh that rang like sunshine in a cavern, "I bring you a message from above. Mother Ceres has shut up the earth, locked it tight, and thrown away the key. No corn will grow, no fruit will ripen, no flower will bloom till her daughter is restored." Pluto's dark face grew thoughtful. "She has dared much," he said gravely, "but she has suffered much too." Quicksilver glanced towards Proserpina, who had sprung eagerly forward, hope shining in her eyes for the first time since she entered that realm. "The gods are not patient," Quicksilver continued. "Men and beasts are starving. Jupiter himself commands that the maiden be restored, if it may be done justly." Pluto rose slowly from his throne. "Justly," he repeated. "Aye, there lies the question." He turned towards Proserpina, and for a moment his voice lost his sternness. "My little queen," he said truly, "tell me truly, have you tasted nothing since you came hither?" "Nothing," Proserpina answered firmly. Pluto sighed, and was about to speak again, when his eye fell on a pomegranate lying near, a great glowing fruit, broken open so that its crimson seeds gleamed like drops of blood in the dusky light. Proserpina looked at it wistfully. How this moment ends, how a single fatal taste binds earth and underworld together, is the turning point of the tale. Pluto's dark eyes narrowed thoughtfully. He had expected that his treasures, His rich fruits and elaborate confections would bend the stubborn little girl to his will, but here she stood, undaunted, unmoved by all the glitter and aroma of his palace. It was a kind of defiance, gentle yet unshakable, that surprised him more than angered him. "My little Proserpina," he said at last, in a voice softer than usual, "you love your mother dearly, do you not?" Proserpina looked up, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of defiance and affection. "Yes," she said plainly, "with all my heart, and I never shall forget her, nor the sunshine, nor the flowers." Pluto's lips twitched into a shadow of a smile. "Then I see," he muttered to himself, "that no wealth, no jewels, no delicacy of mind can give a child what she finds in the memory of her mother." He leaned back upon his throne, folding his hands over his dark robes, and watched the child skip lightly among the vast pillars, her laughter like a small sunbeam flickering in the gloom. For the first time he felt a strange warmth in his chest, a flicker of what mortals call joy. Not the joy of possession, nor of power, but the gentler, quieter delight of seeing one's heart touched, even a little, by love. Proserpina, noticing his gaze, paused. "Do you wish," she asked shyly, "that you could go outside too, to feel the sun upon your face and the wind in the trees?" Pluto sighed, a sound like the distant echo of a subterranean river. "Ah, little one, I am of the darkness, and yet I think sometimes that if I could follow you even a single day, I might remember what it is to be alive in the light." And in that moment, the vast palace, with all its gold and gems, seemed a little less cold. The gloom softened, and even the shadows among the pillars drew back, as if to let the sunshine of the child's heart penetrate their inky corners. It was clear now, King Pluto had learned a truth no riches could teach, that even the heart of the underworld could feel and could care, and, in a small way, could be warmed by love. Proserpina hesitated, her small fingers hovering over the shriveled fruit. She knew well what her mother had taught her, never to eat anything in the realms of magic if she wished to return home. Yet, looking at that lone pomegranate, parched and pitiful as it was, her heart quivered with longing. Her 6 months of fasting, her resistance to all the splendors and sweets of Pluto's palace had been for this very moment, the hope of tasting something that reminded her of the simple, wholesome delights of the upper world. She picked it up carefully, turning it in her hands, feeling the dry, rough skin. It was not a jewel nor a delicacy prepared by a royal cook, but it seemed in that instant to contain all the sunlight and freshness of the earth she had been so long deprived of. A soft sigh escaped her lips. "Oh, how I have longed for a taste of home," she whispered. She pressed her small teeth against the tough rind, splitting it open, and then, with a mixture of eagerness and reverence, took a bite of the dry red seeds inside. At once a strange and powerful magic stirred within the palace. The halls, for all their gold and gems, seemed darker than before, and Pluto, standing at the far end of the chamber, felt a sudden chill run down his spine. But as he watched, a faint smile flickered across his somber face. For though he could not understand it fully, he perceived that the child's act, so small, so simple, yet so courageous, was also the first sign of the balance between the upper world and his own dominions. Proserpina, cheeks flushed with a warm rosy glow as she chewed the fruit, savoring the faint sweetness. Though the pomegranate was withered and dry, it symbolized the connection to her mother, to the sun, to the life above ground. And in that single act, the long months of tension, the struggle of heart and will, and the delicate interplay between love and captivity had reached a critical turning point. Quicksilver, arriving just at that moment, paused at the doorway. He had come to carry her away, yet he could not interrupt the sacred first taste of freedom, however small, that her lips had claimed. And so the stage was set. The dry pomegranate, seemingly insignificant, had become the pivot on which the fate of the child, and indeed the seasons themselves, would turn.
Pluto sighed and passed his hand gloomily over his dark brow. "Nevertheless," he continued, "since your dear mother has suffered so deeply, and since all the earth itself is perishing for your sake, I will no longer oppose your return. Take her, Quicksilver, and lead her back to the light of day." At these words, Quicksilver clapped his hands for joy, and Proserpina uttered a little cry of delight and sprang forward to throw herself into his arms. But the sharp-eyed messenger suddenly paused and fixed his glance full upon the child. "Hold!" cried he. "Before we go one step farther, there is one question which must be answered. Proserpina, have you tasted any food since you have been in this kingdom?" The poor child turned pale, and her eyes fell upon the ground. She did not dare to look either at Pluto or at Quicksilver. I only smelled the pomegranate," said she in a faint voice. Quicksilver shook his head gravely. "Smelling is one thing, but eating is another. Speak the truth, little maiden, for the truth must be known." Then Proserpina, seeing that concealment was useless, lifted her eyes full of tears. "I did not mean to eat it," she sobbed. "Indeed, I did not. But before I knew what I was about, I bit it, just a little." "How many seeds?" asked Quicksilver quickly. Proserpina hesitated a moment, and then answered, "6." At this, King Pluto, who had hitherto listened in silence, rose slowly from his seat. A gloomy satisfaction, not unmixed with sorrow, passed over his dark countenance. "Then," he said, "the law of fate has spoken. Had you eaten no portion of food, you might have gone forever. But since you have tasted 6 seeds of the pomegranate, you must remain with me 6 months of every year." Proserpina burst into tears and clung to Quicksilver, while even the light-hearted messenger felt a shadow fall upon his spirits. Yet he was too wise to contend against the decrees of destiny. "So it be," said Quicksilver at last. "But during the other 6 months she shall dwell with her mother, and the earth shall rejoice again." King Pluto bent down and gently kissed Proserpina's forehead. "You shall not always find me cruel," he said. "When the time comes for you to return to me, I will try to make my gloomy kingdom brighter for your sake." Then Quicksilver took Proserpina by the hand, and in a moment they had passed the iron gates, leapt over the 3-headed Cerberus, and were speeding upward through the dark passages that led to the upper world. When Mother Ceres beheld her child once more, she clasped her to her bosom with a cry of joy that made the whole earth tremble. At once the spell was broken. The fields grew green, the corn sprang up, the flowers blossomed, and the starving cattle found pasture again. Summer returned, smiling and abundant. Yet from that day forth, the world was never quite the same as before. For every year when Proserpina descends again to King Pluto, the earth grows sad. The leaves fade, the flowers wither, and winter spreads his chill over hill and valley. But when the child comes back to her mother, joy revives, and spring walks abroad once more.
And thus it is, even to this day, that the sorrow and the happiness of Mother Ceres are written on the face of the world. And at last, after a long and joyous journey, Proserpina beheld the familiar sight of her mother's home. Mother Ceres, who had never ceased wandering and weeping, caught a glimpse of her daughter and rushed forward with outstretched arms. The mother and child embraced, and all the sorrow of the past months seemed to melt away in that single perfect moment. Ceres wept for joy, and Proserpina laughed, gathering flowers as she ran along the path, scattering petals in every direction. The air itself seemed to rejoice. The sun shone warmer and brighter than it had in many moons, and the gentle breezes carried the sweet fragrance of every blossoming plant. Even the trees, the rivers, and the hills seemed to rejoice in their reunion. Birds sang more merrily, and the earth itself, long languishing under Ceres' grief, now flourished with golden grain and fragrant flowers. The farmers rejoiced at the sudden abundance, and the children played freely among the fields, gathering the flowers and fruits that had been missing for so long. Yet the world had learned the lesson of sorrow and joy. For 6 months each year, Proserpina would return to the shadowy halls of King Pluto, and the earth would grow cold and barren once more. But each spring, when she came back to her mother, the cycle of renewal began anew, and life, love, and laughter returned to the world. Thus was the balance preserved, grief tempered by joy, winter by summer, shadow by light, and the bond between Mother Ceres and her beloved Proserpina became a living emblem of the seasons, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope and love could restore the earth and the heart alike. Mother Ceres' eyes grew wide with alarm, and she clutched Proserpina close. "You mean you have eaten it?" she asked, almost trembling. Proserpina nodded, her cheeks coloring a little. "Yes, Mother, just a tiny bite. I could not help myself. It was so long since I had tasted anything, and the fruit seemed almost like a dream." Ceres drew a deep breath, her face softening as she saw that her child was safe and unharmed. "Ah, my little one," she whispered, "though you have taken but a few seeds, it is a sign of your courage and your strong spirit. Fear not, for nothing that you have done can undo the joy of your return." Then, turning her gaze to the fields, Ceres noticed with delight that wherever Proserpina had trod, the earth was now bursting into life. Green shoots, budding flowers, and waving grasses as far as the eye could see. The rivers sparkled, and the trees seemed to lean toward her as if to greet their beloved daughter. "The earth itself rejoices," said Ceres, her voice breaking with happiness. "It is as though your step has brought back all the blessings of life." And so, hand in hand, mother and daughter wandered through the fields, gathering flowers, tasting the sweet air, and laughing with unbounded joy. From that day forth, the seasons followed their eternal rhythm. When Proserpina returned to her mother, the world blossomed and flourished. When she went back to King Pluto, the earth rested and prepared for the time to come. In this way, grief and hope, loss and reunion were woven into the eternal cycle of the seasons, and the bond of love between Mother Ceres and her beloved Proserpina became the living emblem of the seasons, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope and love could restore the earth and the heart alike. The moment the fruit touched my lips, everything changed. Before I could even understand what I was doing, the doors opened, and there stood King Pluto, with Quicksilver beside him. "I swear to you, Mother," Proserpina said softly, her voice trembling, "I never swallowed a bite. I truly didn't. But—" she hesitated, lowering her eyes. "6 seeds remained in my mouth.
Just 6. Ceres froze. The color drained from her face as though the earth itself had gone pale with her. "Oh, my poor child," she cried, pulling Proserpina close. 6 seeds, 6 months. For every seed you tasted, fate has claimed a month of your life. You are returned to me, but only halfway. 6 months in the light and 6 months in the shadows. Half a year with your mother, and half a year in the kingdom of darkness." Her voice broke. To be bound to that joyless throne, to that cold and lonely king. But Proserpina lifted her head, her eyes calm, almost thoughtful. She kissed her mother's cheek. "Please don't speak of him so cruelly," she said gently. "King Pluto is not without kindness. He did wrong, yes, but he was desperately alone. Imagine living forever in a palace where no laughter echoes, where no sunlight ever falls." She smiled faintly. "I think I can endure the darkness, knowing it is only for a season. And if my presence brings even a little warmth to that silent world, then perhaps it is not such a terrible fate." She took her mother's hands. "I will return to you, always. And when I do, the earth will bloom again. Flowers will rise, fields will awaken, life will remember itself." Ceres looked at her daughter then, not as a lost child, but as something wiser now, something changed. "Then so it shall be," she whispered. And so the world learned its rhythm. When Proserpina walks beneath the sun, the earth rejoices. When she descends into shadow, the land sleeps. Thus were the seasons born, not from chance nor from cold law, but from love, loss, and a handful of pomegranate seeds.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.